The train slid into Frostvik station under a sky the color of unpolished steel. Snow packed the tracks in gray ridges where the wind had shoved it against the platform. When the doors hissed open, the cold hit like a wall. I stepped out first. The air felt thin and metallic, like breathing in needles. My breath ghosted out in front of me, and I had to stop for a second, adjusting the straps of my pack while my lungs got over the shock. "Dude," Dylan said beside me, dragging his duffel by one strap, his grin fighting with the color draining from his face. "This is aggressively cold." His nose was already turning pink. We took a bus from Frostvik up into the valley, where the road wound between dark pines and steep, snow-choked slopes. The village where we were staying, Murholt, clung to the side of the mountain like it had been carved there and left to harden. Everything looked older than it probably was. Chalets with steep roofs sagging under heavy snow. Wooden balconies stacked with cut firewood. Narrow, recessed windows glowing a soft orange as daylight started to fade out behind the ridgeline. Smoke climbed in thin, straight lines from chimneys into the motionless air. The main street was almost silent. A few bundled figures walked with quick, precise steps, heads down, no wasted movement. No one stood around. No one leaned on railings, checking their phone. Our footsteps echoed in the quiet, bouncing between wooden facades and shuttered storefronts. The air smelled faintly of resin and wood smoke. Henrik and Jonas were already waiting when we got to the guest house, two shapes in dark jackets standing near the front steps. They were both taller than I expected. Henrik was wrapped in a heavy navy parka zipped all the way up, a thick beanie pulled down almost to his eyebrows. Jonas looked more relaxed, jacket half-zipped, cigarette between his fingers, backpack on the snow beside him. Meeting them face to face felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite name. We'd been in the same Discord server for almost a year. I'd spent late nights with my headphones on, listening to Henrik's calm voice explaining rope systems, or Jonas sending blurry photos from trailheads across northern Sweden. They were the outside guys. Dylan and I? We were the ones who joked about touching grass, like it was a dare. Screens soften people. They're all rectangles and pixels and curated angles. Seeing them in real life, full height, sound echoing off actual walls when they spoke, it knocked out that thin layer of distance I'd gotten used to. Dylan didn't hesitate. He went straight up the steps, hand outstretched, already making a joke about finally verifying they weren't AI. They laughed, polite and a little stiff. Friendly, but not enthusiastic. It was subtle, but I picked up on it. They didn't mean anything by it, we just didn't match. They were all corded muscle and quiet competence. Dylan and I were pale, neon sneaker kids who had spent more time around monitors than mountains. I kept my hands in my pockets, and tried not to look like I was thinking about all of that. Inside the guest house, the air felt too warm at first. The walls were wood-paneled, the windows layered with lace curtains stained slightly yellow. I sat on the edge of the bed in our room and pulled off my gloves slowly, flexing my fingers. They were slow to respond, stiff with a dull ache. I wasn't used to this kind of cold. After we dropped our bags, Jonas spread a map out across the small table by the window. We gathered around, leaning over it as he smoothed the creases with the side of his hand. The route they'd planned looped around the shoulders of Kolfjell, one of the bigger mountains that loomed over the valley. We'd move through dense spruce forests first, then climb up onto open ridgelines where the wind scoured the snow down to hardpack. The full loop would take 4 days, maybe 5, depending on conditions. Nothing technical, Henrik said, tracing the red-marked trail with his finger. Steep in some places. Some exposure on the ridge. But weather's stable now. It's about as friendly as this place gets in winter. Friendly. Right. We went through our gear before dinner. Everyone had the basics: insulated shells, thermal base layers, wool socks, crampons we probably wouldn't need but brought anyway, ultralight sleeping bags rated lower than I ever wanted to experience, collapsible stoves, freeze-dried meals, snow goggles, small fire kits in waterproof tins. Each of us had a knife. Not some movie prop, just practical, palm-length blades, carving wood, cutting paracord, splitting frozen sausage. Mine sat in the side pocket of my pack, the handle wrapped in a band of neon orange tape so I could find it easily with a headlamp. That night, we walked through the village streets and ducked into a low building squeezed between a bakery and a church, its painted sign half hidden under a curtain of icicles. Inside, the restaurant was dim and hot. Wooden tables. Thick curtains. A wood stove humming in the corner. The food came out heavy and brown and steaming, portion sizes sized for people who burn twice our calories just by existing out here. The locals kept their voices low. When the older woman at the bar spoke, it was in quick, clipped Swedish that Henrik translated in fragments. She wasn't rude, exactly, but there was no softness anywhere in her expression. Once our plates hit the table, she seemed to forget we existed. It didn't bother me. It was like we'd wandered onto someone else's stage. The story going on here would keep going long after we left. We were just a short, odd chapter. We were set to leave the next morning. Batteries charged, layers laid out, boots thawing by the radiator. Packs leaned against the wall in a neat row, straps tightened, straps rolled. We were ready. Or we thought we were. Morning came with a cold that felt personal. I woke to a pale rectangle of light pressed against the guesthouse curtain. When I pulled it back, the sky outside looked washed in icy blue, streaked by faint, motionless cirrus clouds. Frost traced spiderweb patterns at the edges of the glass. Downstairs, we ate fast, coffee that tasted like burned metal, bread and butter, some kind of cheese that squeaked against my teeth. I could barely taste any of it. Nerves and cold flattened everything. We met outside in the narrow gravel lot. Our breaths mixed in the air as the others made last-minute adjustments. Buckles clicked. Straps snapped tight. Jonas checked his watch, then gave a small nod, a quiet ceremony of departure. "Ready?" he asked. Dylan grinned like this was a theme park ride instead of a 4-day winter trek, then winced as his pack settled onto his shoulders. We walked through Murholt on foot. Snow squeaked under our boots, packed enough to hold us but soft enough to give way with each step. We passed the last cluster of houses, a small yard cluttered with rusted farm tools, and then we were at the edge of the trees. The trailhead was marked with a weather-beaten wooden board and a map sealed behind cloudy plastic. The routes were color-coded in faded paint. Someone had stuck a laminated warning sheet in the corner, last summer's, judging by the date. Dylan took a picture anyway. We passed under the first line of spruce trees and the village vanished behind us. Branches hung low with snow that looked older than the season. It felt heavy. Like it had been sitting there for months, waiting. The air went still. Even our breathing felt loud. Henrik and Jonas moved at an easy, steady pace up front, trekking poles tapping a rhythm on the frozen path. Dylan and I hung a few paces back, mostly because we kept stopping to take photos. "Bro, check this," Dylan said for maybe the 5th time, already stepping off to stage a picture of himself, heroically, leaning against a tree like a catalog model. "Save your battery," I said. "You're gonna end up vlogging your own hypothermia." He pretended not to hear me. The forest thickened as we climbed. The path narrowed, banks of snow rising on either side. The silence pressed in. There were no birds. No wind. Just us. I started to feel the snow creeping up over my boots. It hadn't looked that deep from the trailhead, but up here it was past our ankles. Sometimes, when we stepped wrong, we'd sink nearly to the knee in hidden drifts. "Doing okay back there?" Jonas called over his shoulder. "Yeah," I lied, forcing a thumbs up. I didn't want to admit how fast the cold was seeping through my gloves, or how my calves were already burning. That was when we saw the sign. It looked wrong from the start, rusted metal where everything else along the trail had been wood. It was nailed crookedly into the trunk of a pine, half covered in a crust of wintry buildup. Jonas stepped off the path to brush away the snow. Faded red letters emerged underneath, eaten at the edges by rust. Stigen stanged. Vederlig farlight. Ammerdet avstank tills vidare. Henrik translated over his shoulder. Trail closed. Dangerous conditions. Area closed until further notice. We all looked up. The sky above the trees was flawless. No storm. No low cloud. No wind. Dylan snorted. Yeah, I see the danger. Blue sky. Zero drama. Lawsuit territory. Henrik shrugged. Could be from early winter. They forget to remove these sometimes. Or it's for tourists. The village likes to scare away unprepared hikers when the season turns. We've been delayed almost 2 weeks getting here. Airline strikes. A freak storm that swept through Central Europe and scrambled flight schedules. Henrik had warned us in the group chat that the trails up here didn't get much traffic this late in the season. Finding that sign didn't feel like a twist of fate so much as an annoyance. It didn't look like the main route we'd planned either. The snow-covered line of trail beyond the sign dipped a little, then rose toward a slightly different ridgeline than the one Jonas had traced yesterday on the map. Shortcut, Dylan said, lifting his phone to take a picture of the sign. New Discord emoji. Some part of me wearily noted that I was committing the stupid thing, ignoring local warnings, stepping into the clearly marked "Don't" zone. Every horror story I'd ever watched started like this. I stepped past the sign anyway. We all did. We'd been following the closed trail for almost 2 hours when Dylan slowed down beside me and pointed. Hey! Look! At first I didn't see it. Sunlight glared off the snow and hard white sheets. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw the pattern, a line of footprints cutting across the slope and veering left into thicker forest. The edges were sharp. Clean. No softening. No drift marks. Boots, definitely. Deep, like the person was carrying weight. Slightly smaller than Henrik's, bigger than mine. Jonas was already moving toward them by the time Dylan finished saying, "Is that?" He squatted, pressing 2 fingers into one of the prints. He lifted them and brushed off the snow, checking the consistency. "Recent," he said. "Within the last few hours, I'd say. Maybe less with this temperature." Henrik stepped beside him, eyes following the line as it curved into the trees. "Heading northwest. Probably going for the outer ridge. There's a cabin that way, if I'm remembering right." Dylan and I exchanged a look. I could feel the change moving through our group, like a current. We'd accepted that we would be alone out here. The off-season, the empty guesthouse, the quiet village, that all framed the trip like some kind of private experience. Seeing someone else's tracks cut through that emptiness did something to my chest I didn't have a word for. It was almost relief. "Let's catch up," Dylan said, sounding suddenly energized. "If they're local, they'll know these trails way better than we do. Worst case, we get directions. Best case, we make a new buddy, get some crazy story out of them." It wasn't a bad idea. I also suspected deep down that he just wanted a reason not to feel like the slowest guy in the group. No one actually said yes, let's follow a stranger into the woods. But when Jonas started walking along the line of prints, no one objected either. We followed. The new path wasn't really a path at all. The snow was deeper here, layered unevenly over roots and rocks. The trees grew closer together. The canopy felt lower, branches knitting overhead, swallowing up a lot of the pale light from the sky. Some of the smaller trees leaned at strange angles, trunks bowing under loads of snow that looked too heavy for them. Limbs were snapped not in the brittle way storm damage looked, but cleanly, as if something heavy had simply stepped on them. Now and then, Jonas would pause, check the spacing of the footprints, nod to himself, and keep going. We picked our way over half-buried branches and sudden dips, boots sliding every so often on patches of ice hidden under the snow. The air changed. I didn't notice when it happened. One moment, I could feel faint, threadbare movement of wind against my ears. The next, there was nothing. Stillness. My brain kept reaching for sound and coming up empty. Every so often, I'd turn my head, scanning between the trunks, expecting to glimpse movement. A figure ahead. A flash of color. A glimpse of someone's jacket. Nothing. Whoever we were following wasn't acting like a normal hiker. They hadn't stopped anywhere obvious. No disturbed pockets of snow off to the side. No sign of a pause. Just a steady, unwavering line. After maybe another hour, Dylan finally said what we'd all been thinking. We should have caught up by now. He wasn't panting yet, but he had that edge to his voice that said he wasn't far off. The prints still looked fresh. If anything, the lack of wind and new snowfall preserved them like they'd just been made. Rationally, we should have closed the distance. No one suggested turning back. Turning around with nothing to show for it felt unacceptable in the moment. It wasn't logical, just emotional. We had latched onto the idea of a destination, of a human endpoint to this trail, and letting go of that silently felt harder than admitting we were tired. We kept following. By the time we stopped, my thighs were shaking. The climb had been gradual, but long. The slope just kept easing upward, step by step. Breathing hurt in a new way, a raw scratch at the back of my throat. Dylan was the first to call it. He stumbled slightly on a patch where the snow dipped around a root, then braced his hands on his knees. Okay, he said, voice breaking on a little laugh. Bench break. Right here. Right now. Henrik let his pack slide off his shoulders. We can take 10. Jonas looked like he wanted to keep going. He glanced down at the line of footprints ahead of us, then back at me, like he expected me to back him up. The prints looked unchanged. No softening. No drift. No sign of turning. I didn't want to be the reason we stopped. I also didn't want to be the one to say, maybe we should quit chasing a ghost. Give us a few, I said. If we don't see anything soon, we turn back to this spot. Okay? He nodded, tight-lipped, then started forward alone while we shrugged our packs off. Henrik dumped his gear in the snow and started moving his fingers, flexing them slowly to return warmth. Dylan dug around in his bag for a protein bar, then tore into it like it had personally offended him. We'll start a small fire, Henrik muttered. Just enough to warm hands. Not a full camp yet. He drifted a few meters away to collect narrow dead branches poking out of the snow, testing them for dryness with quick, practiced motions. I watched Jonas disappear between the trees, following the footprints. He didn't vanish dramatically. 1 second he was there, dark jacket moving against a pale background. The next, the trees simply closed in, and he became another merging shape in the distance. The forest tightened around us. The trunks grew closer. The branches above knitted thicker, letting in less sky. The light took on that gray quality you only see when snow, cloud, and tree bark blend into one continuous palette. We didn't talk much. Somewhere out ahead, a branch snapped. Time stretched. 10 minutes. 15, maybe? Firelight started to flicker between the trees as Henrik coaxed a small blaze to life in a circle of exposed dirt he'd scraped clear. At last, Jonas came back. His face was tight, that falsely casual expression people wear when they're trying not to look worried. Tracks just ended, he said. Dylan straightened. Ended how? Like they walked off a cliff? Henrik asked. Nothing that dramatic, Jonas said. He squatted by the fire, warming his hands. They go on, heel to toe, same spacing, and then at one point there's just untouched snow. No scuff. No drift. I checked both sides. Either a drift covered exactly the right stretch of ground or… He stopped. Or what? I asked. He gave a small shrug. Or I missed something. Maybe I was tired. Anyway, I don't like it. We camp here. In the morning, we link back to the main loop. We don't keep following ghosts. No one argued. We set camp. 2 tents went up quickly, stakes hammered into compacted snow, guy lines wrapped around buried rocks for extra hold. Our hands were clumsy with cold, but we practiced the motions enough that our fingers knew what to do even when sensation lagged. Dinner was freeze-dried stew reanimated with melted snow and boiled water. It tasted like salty cardboard and texture confusion, but it was hot and dense, and we'd lost the right to be picky 4 hours ago. Jonas pulled out a small vacuum-sealed pouch and a metal mug. Hot apple drink mix, he explained. Powdered sugar, powdered apple, powdered something. He passed the mug around our group after taking the first sip. It tasted like a childhood memory I couldn't quite reach. Dylan tried to tell a story about a guy at his job who'd once tried to install a GPU upside down, but he forgot the middle 3 times, and every reset made it funnier. Henrik laughed hard enough that drink almost came out of his nose. I realized, at some point, that my shoulders had relaxed. While we were talking, it started to snow. Not heavily. Small flakes drifted down in slow spirals, catching in the firelight before settling silently into the surrounding darkness. The trees loomed beyond the little circle of warmth, their trunks alternating between black silhouettes and sudden brief flashes of orange when the flames leaped. Then, abruptly, shut up. Jonas's voice cut cleanly through the chatter. We went still. Silence filled the space. Even the fire seemed to quiet down. Then I heard it. Crunch. Not the short squeak of our own boots. A deeper, heavier compression sound. Snow compacting under weight. Crunch. It came in slow, measured intervals. Not frantic. Not running. Just moving. Around us. I tracked it in my head. Right side, behind the tents. Then left, deeper in the trees. Then back, closer. Circling. Jonas stood. His whole posture changed, looser and tighter at the same time. He stared into the dark between the tree trunks, jaw clenched. Hey! He called. Halla! Something moved. The sound changed, faster, more urgent. Snow thrown sideways as something scrambled away, 4 points hitting the ground in a rapid pattern. I glimpsed a shape, low to the ground, massy, a flash of pale fur and darker shadow between 2 distant trunks. Then it was gone. We held still for a long time. The forest clamped down around us. My ears rang with how hard I was listening. Henrik broke the silence without any attempt at sugarcoating. Wolves! The word dropped into the center of our little circle like a stone. Dylan's jaw snapped shut. I could see an expression moving across his face, fear, then the clumsy attempt to turn it into a joke, then the decision not to. No one said, "It's fine." No one said, "They're more scared of us." Or any of the things you read on tourist websites. We just quietly agreed that we'd seen enough of this detour. We'd head back to safer, more traveled routes. We went to bed early. Not because we were well rested, but because staying awake meant sitting in the dark listening to every sound and assigning teeth to it. I slept with my knife in my hand. I woke up to quiet white light pressing against my eyelids. The air inside the tent had gone colder, not by degrees so much as by category. My nose felt raw where it stuck out of the sleeping bag. My breath fogged, hanging low for a second before dissolving. My shoulder ached from lying half on my side, half on my pack. I shifted and slipped my feet out of the bag, maneuvering carefully so I wouldn't elbow anyone else. The fabric walls rustled softly. When I unzipped the tent and pushed my head out, the first thing I saw was the prints. Dozens of them. They circled the tent in looping, overlapping arcs, some cutting within centimeters of the fabric. The snow had captured every detail, the pads, the claws, the shifting of weight. Wolves. A lot of them. Some of the tracks approached the tent directly, stopped, turned away. Others seemed to pace back and forth, restless, before veering off toward the trees. Henrik stepped out of the other tent just then, squinting against the brightness. He followed my gaze, then let out a low whistling breath between his teeth. Dylan emerged last. He looked like he'd slept in fragments, lines pressed into his cheek from the sleeping bag, hair flattened under his beanie. When he saw the tracks, he let out a low, forced laugh. Great. Cool. Awesome. Love this game. Let's move, Jonas said quietly, already pulling stakes from the snow. We tore down the tents faster than we'd set them up. Our hands shook, not just from cold now, but from something under it. For the first hour, we walked in a kind of stunned silence, each of us privately insisting that we were not shaken as we followed Jonas's bearing back toward what we assumed was the main trail. But the world had shifted overnight. The snow had thickened. A thin layer of powder covered whatever faint traces had existed of our outbound path. We kept expecting to find our old footprints, but any indentation we found could have been anything. After 2 hours, it became obvious we were not reconnecting with any marked trail. The forest bled into itself. Trees repeated. Small clearings looked like scenes we'd already walked through. Each time we thought we recognized something, the angle would be slightly wrong, the slope steeper or shallower than it had been. "We're not lost," Jonas said, as if saying it made it true. "We're off route." "Those seem like synonyms," Dylan muttered. "We still have the sun," Henrik added. "And we have GPS." He held up his phone, like that somehow discounted the fact that bars were flickering between 1 and 0. Jonas shifted the strap of his pack across his chest and looked north, orienting himself with brief, sharp glances. "We keep going this way. The valley opens up eventually. Worst case, we bivvy one more night and walk out tomorrow." We walked. The snow was deeper now. Each step sank further than the last, filling our boots with increasing amounts of frustration. The slope tipped up and down without warning, small rises and dips that burned through our energy faster than the distance deserved. No one spoke. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. Something moving between the trees at a distance I couldn't clearly resolve. Slightly darker than the trunks, low to the ground. When I turned my head, it froze. Then, when I blinked, it was gone. I tried not to look at Henrik and Jonas, but once, when I couldn't help it, I caught that same flicker in their eyes, awareness, not wanting to acknowledge it out loud. We were being followed. We all knew by what. But as long as the sound stayed in the background, as long as we didn't run, as long as we kept moving, we could hold on to the thin confidence that we were not prey yet. After a while, the wolves stopped being the worst thing about the situation. That realization came when Henrik's knees buckled on a patch of uneven snow, and he dropped down hard on one knee. He didn't swear or yell. He just stayed there, head down, breath coming fast. We stopped without needing to talk about it. The clearing we'd reached wasn't really a clearing, just a slightly wider gap between trees where the slope leveled for a few meters. It felt huge. Jonas shrugged off his pack and set it down with more force than strictly necessary. No one talked about whether we should keep moving. "Tense," he said. "We can push a little." Henrik started, but stopped when he tried to stand and swayed. Dylan didn't even try to fake it. He just sat straight down in the snow and leaned back on his hands, staring up at the colorless sky. We didn't discuss how close the wolves felt now. We all knew. We built one tent. It was a compromise we didn't pretend was about warmth instead of fear. For bodies, one cramped space. We didn't gather firewood. We didn't risk making the light and smoke and smell of cooking. We ripped open vacuum-sealed meal packs with aching fingers and ate them cold, the food dense and rubbery in our mouths. Our boots stayed on. Our headlamps stayed within reach. The knives, which had felt like overkill back in Merhold, now lay in our hands, the metal painfully cold against our palms. The fabric walls of the tent flexed whenever a faint breeze found its way between the trees. Each ripple looked, in the dim light, like something pushing in from outside. I lay there listening to the sound of 3 other people breathing in the dark, and to the spaces between those breaths. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up with my heart already pounding. Something had changed. The cold had sharpened again, the kind that moves straight past skin and into bone. My breath smoked in front of my face. I stayed perfectly still. Then I heard it. Crunch. Paws in snow. Not many. Not the scattered, diffused noise of a whole pack. 1. Maybe 2. Slow. Considering. Right outside. The steps moved around us in a half circle. I could hear the faint sniffing, the small huffs of breath, close enough that some primitive part of my brain imagined hot moisture fogging through the fabric inches from my head. I turned my eyes, not my head. Dylan was awake, his eyes wide and glossy in the dark. Henrik's hand was clenched around his knife so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. Jonas lay on his back, gaze fixed on one point above us, jaw working silently. We held our breaths as if that could erase us. The sound stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then came the tearing. The tent fabric pulled taut, threads popping one by one in a drawn-out, ripping sound. A seam opened slowly in the corner, then widened. Cold rushed in, bringing the smell of snow and animal. A head pushed through. Yellow eyes reflected what little light the snow outside provided. The wolf's muzzle was dusted with frost, its breath puffing in short bursts. Its lips peeled back to show its teeth. It lunged. Pain hit my shoulder like a hammer, hot and bright. Its jaws clamped down, and all the air left my lungs in a sound I didn't recognize as mine. Everything exploded into motion. Arms flailed. Knives flashed in cramped arcs. Someone shouted. Someone else swore. The sleeping bags wrapped around our legs turned our attempts at movement into clumsy thrashing. I drove my knife into the wolf's side again and again, the resistance sickening, each strike feeling too shallow. It snarled, twisting, jerking the wound in my shoulder so violently I saw white for a second. Henrik hit it from the opposite side, his blade punching into thick fur and hidden ribs. Jonas stabbed at its neck once, twice, 3 times. Dylan's movements were wild, panicked, knife scraping more fabric than flesh. The wolf tried to pull back. My shoulder went with it. I screamed and felt my own voice echo inside my head, distant. Then, abruptly, its grip slackened. Its body collapsed partially on top of me, heavy and shaking. I kept stabbing until my arm stopped listening to me. The knife slipped in my bloody hand. Then, suddenly, it was just still. The only sound inside the tent was ragged breathing and the soft, horrific patter of something wet onto the floor. It took me a moment to realize that another sound had been running underneath all of that. Outside. Something else moving. Thrashing. Heavy impacts. Wet, choked yelps that cut off mid-sound. Snow panicking under enormous weight. Then silence. Then more impacts. Then silence again. We froze. No one said, "What is that?" No one needed to. We stayed there, tangled in gear and dead weight and each other, waiting for something else to push through the torn fabric. Nothing did. Jonas was the first to move. He reached for the ripped corner of the tent and peeled it back, just enough to look through. He flinched, then widened the opening further and let out a word in Swedish that I didn't know, but understood anyway. Henrik crawled over him. Dylan followed. I pressed my hand over my shoulder, feeling the hot, sticky wetness seeping through my base layer. My head felt light, buzzing. I wasn't sure my legs would hold me, but the idea of being alone in the tent while the others were out there was worse than anything I imagined outside. So I followed. The scene in the snow looked wrong, like a still from a movie someone had paused mid-chaos. Wolves lay everywhere. Not just one. Not the single, skinny wilderness animal I'd imagined. Big bodies scattered around the edge of our makeshift camp in broken heaps. One lay against a tree, its back twisted too far in the wrong direction. Another had fur matted dark along its side where something had torn open its skin. A third lay on its back, belly torn, ribs cracked like splintered wood. Some had been thrown hard enough to leave impact scars in the snow behind them. The snow itself, it looked trampled. Something huge had moved through here, stamping deep, ragged holes into the crust. The prints were big and roughly human in outline, but wrong, toes too long, spacing too wide, depth inconsistent in a way that made no sense physically. Some stood close together, as if something had pivoted in place. Others stretched meters apart, like a single stride had launched it halfway across the clearing. "Jesus!" Dylan whispered. "Oh my God! Oh my God!" Henrik walked slowly to the edge of one of the prints, then stopped. His expression had locked down into something neutral, a face you put on when your mind is racing. Jonas turned in a slow circle, surveying the perimeter as if expecting something to materialize from the tree line. Nothing moved. The wolves were very much dead. I sank down in the snow because my legs decided to quit. My shoulder throbbed, the pain moving in waves. Henrik snapped out of his trance and came over, dropping to his knees. "Let me see," he said. He pulled the med kit from his pack, fingers moving with controlled efficiency. He cut open my already shredded jacket, peeled fabric away from the bite. 3 deep punctures had broken skin along my shoulder and collarbone, along with a ragged tear. He poured water over it, the cold making me hiss. Then came the disinfectant, the bandage, the pressure wrap. He tied it off with strips of gauze and an extra length of fabric. Not as bad as it feels, he said. You're lucky. It could have crushed your clavicle. Lucky. Sure. We didn't talk about the huge weird prints. We didn't debate theories. We didn't want to give it a shape in words. We just packed up what we absolutely needed and left the ripped tent standing among the corpses. I don't remember how long we walked after that. Time got slippery. We moved because stopping felt like volunteering. At some point we saw new tracks. They weren't ours. They weren't the oversized, nightmare things from the clearing. They were not wolf. They were human. A single line of footprints, running parallel to our path, emerging from somewhere behind us and stretching ahead through the trees. Just like the first set. Clean edges. Deep impressions. No sign of disturbance between where they appeared and where they vanished into the distance. Hope arrived without anyone inviting it. No one said anything, but I could feel the way our bodies changed. Our pace picked up a little. Heads lifted. Shoulders came back slightly from that defeated hunch they'd been settling into. I don't know how long we followed them. 15 minutes. 30. More. We walked in that narrow corridor of focus, eyes locked on the line of prints, letting them pull us forward. Then, just like before, they ended. One step. Then another. Then nothing. A clean edge where the last footprints sat, perfect and solitary, and beyond it, undisturbed snow. No half-print. No scuff. No indentation. The same shiver went through us, a shared flicker of recognition and dread. What the hell? Dylan said softly. Drift, maybe, Henrik said, but his voice lacked conviction. Where is the wind that made the drift? Jonas asked. Nobody had an answer. It was Jonas who looked up first. His arm lifted slowly, hand trembling, and he pointed at something above and ahead of us. I followed his gaze. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The pine tree he'd indicated was big, one of the oldest-looking ones in this part of the forest. Its upper branches were weighed down with heavy snow, the trunk dark and rough beneath frozen sheets. And there, tangled in the highest boughs, something hung. It wasn't quite sitting. It wasn't quite lying down. It was lodged, wedged between limbs that bowed around it as if trying to hold a weight they hadn't evolved to bear. Its body was wrong. The torso was broad and thick, covered in patches of skin that looked blackened and blistered, like frostbite taken past its logical endpoint. Some parts had no skin at all, raw meat exposed and frozen over. Sparse, coarse hair clung to other areas in uneven clumps. Its arms dangled down, long and corded, fingers ending in blunt, cracked nails. A pair of antlers jutted from either side of its head, massive and branching, caked in ice and something darker that might have been dried blood or moss or both. Thin veins of black frost traced along them. Its face was the worst part. The skull under the skin looked almost human. Almost. The proportions were just off enough to register as alien. The eyes were large and glassy, a pale, sickly green that didn't seem to reflect the light so much as swallow it. Its mouth sagged open, lips split and peeling. And below all that, hanging incongruously from this mass of horror, were legs. Human legs. Bare. Pale. Thin and dangling, too short to belong to a body that size. They swung slightly in the faint breeze, toes bluish with cold. The join where they met the torso looked wrong, and uneven, seemed like someone had attached them as an afterthought. The branches holding it creaked. Something shifted. The tree gave a sound like a low groan, and then the limbs snapped. The thing fell. It hit the ground with a blunt, heavy thud that shook loose snow from nearby branches. A ring of powder leapt up around it. For a moment it lay still. Then it moved. The human legs twisted, bones bending in ways that made my stomach lurch. They braced against the snow. The torso rolled, then heaved upright. The arms pushed down, like a person doing a push-up, and then it was standing, or at least poised in a hunched, awful half-stance. Its head turned toward us. Its eyes locked on mine. Everything in me went cold in a way the air could never accomplish. The creature surged forward. It was fast. Not the loping, graceful movement of a wild animal. It moved like something that had learned to use its mismatched parts on the fly, compensating with raw power for its lack of grace. Jonas didn't even have time to get his knife out. One moment he was there, hand going instinctively to his belt. The next, the thing's arms were around his waist, massive hands closing like a vice. It lifted him as if he weighed nothing. His scream cut off as the breath was squeezed out of him. The creature slammed him into the ground once, twice, like it was testing the durability of a toy. The second impact made a sound that felt wrong inside my bones. Then it flung him sideways into a tree trunk. He hit with a crack that I felt all the way down my spine. His body folded at an angle that no living spine could manage. Henrik shouted something I didn't catch and took a step forward, knife in hand. "Don't!" I heard myself shout. Then instinct took over. We ran. I didn't decide to. My body did. It just left. The forest blurred. Trees whipped past in streaks of gray and black and white. Branches clawed at my arms, tearing at the fabric of my sleeve. Snow grabbed at my boots and tried to pull them off with every step. I stumbled once, went down hard, rolled, tasted snow and blood and fabric in my mouth. I scrambled back up without checking if I was hurt. Every time my shoulder jarred, pain flared bright enough to make me dizzy. I didn't look back. I didn't shout for Dylan or Henrik. I didn't check if they were behind me or ahead of me. My world narrowed to the next step. Then the next. Then the next. At some point, the slope tipped downward. The trees opened slightly. The pattern of the land changed. I saw a familiar half-burnt log. A stand of young spruce bent in a crescent shape. A patch of ground where the snow looked slightly smoother, as if it had been disturbed some time ago and resettled since. I recognized it. The old camp. Our first camp. The tent we'd abandoned still sagged there, half collapsed, its torn doorway stiff with frozen blood. The bodies of the wolves had softened at the edges, rimmed with frost where snow had started to reclaim their outlines. Nothing else moved. Nothing else made a sound. My legs gave up halfway to the tent. I crawled the rest of the way, shoving aside flaps stiffened by cold and crusted with old gore. Inside, it was narrow and dark and smelled like plastic and iron and old sweat. The sleeping bags were still piled where we'd left them, twisted and crumpled from the previous night's chaos. I found mine by muscle memory and forced my way into it, ignoring the dried stiffness at the entrance where blood had soaked the fabric. I pulled it up over my head, leaving only a small hole near my mouth for air, and curled into the smallest shape I could manage. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Time folded. Every sound became a question. Every creak in the trees, every small shift as snow settled, every distant crack, it all became the creature in my head, bending itself back into motion. Eventually, a different sound cut through. Mechanical. A low hum, muffled at first, then clearer. An engine. I stayed frozen at first, mine insisting that this, too, was some sensory trick. Then the noise grew louder. Another sound joined it, a second engine. Then voices, layered over the mechanical growl. Not English. Not the creature's rasping not voice from my nightmares. Human. I pushed the top of the sleeping bag down and blinked against the sudden light. The tent opening framed a wedge of snow and trees. In that space, two figures appeared, dark against the brightness, wearing high-visibility jackets with reflective strips. Patches I didn't recognize sat on their shoulders. Behind them, a snowmobile idled, tracks carved into the snow in a neat, muscular line. One of them knelt by the entrance of the tent and peered in. His face was wind-burned, his beard rimed with ice. He spoke to me in Swedish first, then switched to slow, careful English when he saw my expression. "Are you alone?" he asked. My throat felt like sandpaper. The first attempt at speaking came out as a rasp. "Yes," I managed. The lie slid out easier than I'd expected. "Ah, yes. Are you injured?" I lifted my good hand and gestured vaguely toward my shoulder. He nodded. His expression didn't change much. He reached out and wrapped a foil blanket around my back, tucking the edges under my arms like I was a kid being swaddled. "Stay still," he said. "We take you down now. Talk later." Later, I would learn why they'd been out here at all. The wolves we'd seen, the pack that had circled our tent, the bodies scattered around the clearing, they weren't just random wildlife. They were part of a monitored group. Each carried an implanted GPS device used by conservation authorities to track their movements and study their behavior. According to the data, every signal from that pack had stopped within the same 30-minute window sometime during the night. All at once. A mass failure like that had never happened before. They assumed poachers at first. Some kind of coordinated illegal cull. They sent out patrols to investigate. Instead of poachers, they found me. The rest of it, the hospital, the police station, the fluorescent lit rooms where strangers in thick sweaters and lanyards tried to make their questions sound gentle, it all blurred together. They treated my bite. They took my clothes. They took my knife. They took my statement. I told them about Henrik, about Dylan, about Jonas. I described the creature in the tree. I described the human legs, the antlers, the smell, the sound of Jonas's body hitting the tree trunk. They listened. They took notes. They asked me to repeat certain parts, then circled back and asked them again in different words hours later. A lawyer appeared at some point. She spoke English with an accent that clipped the edges of certain words. She told me to cooperate. She also told me, quietly and firmly, to stop volunteering extra details. "Just answer their questions," she said. "Short as you can. Don't speculate." I tried to explain again about the human footprints that ended in untouched snow. About the huge, wrong tracks around the wolves' bodies. About the wolves attacking the tent and something else attacking them. When the article came out, none of that was in it. Foreign tourist accused of illegal wolf killing. Faces sentencing Friday. They'd found me in the middle of a cluster of dead, protected predators. I was holding a bloody knife. My jacket and the collapsed tent were soaked in blood. I told them the bite on my shoulder came from a wolf. The forensic report agreed. They never found Henrik or Dylan or Jonas. Rescue teams went out with dogs, drones, thermal imaging. They swept the routes we'd marked on the guest house's map. They widened their search radius. They checked cabins and ravines and frozen streams. They found nothing. According to their experts, it was possible that my brain had taken the violence of a wolf attack and turned it into something larger, something more monstrous, as a way to cope. They talked about trauma-induced hallucinations. About hypothermia and blood loss and isolation. About how the mind, in states like that, could graft nightmares onto reality. The conservation laws were strict. These wolves had been part of a protected pack. Killing even one carried heavy penalties. Killing several, well, intent is very hard to prove, my lawyer told me. They will say you panicked. They will say you overreacted. You used a knife, not a gun, but it does not matter like you think it does. My story was never really considered as a story. It was treated like a symptom. Something to be gently filed away under. Psychological response. In the end, they gave me 20 months. I served 18 with good behavior. Sometimes, at night, in the cell where the radiator clanked and the narrow window showed a slice of the same gray sky I'd first seen over Frostvik, I'd dream about Jonas hanging in that tree. Sometimes, in those dreams, he would look at me. Not the creature. Jonas. Just him. As he was in the server. Laughing into his mic, rolling his eyes at Dylan's dumb jokes. And behind him, just out of frame, hidden where the webcam cut off, something else waited. Something terribly patient. When I woke up, my shoulder would ache as if freshly bitten. The doctor said that was normal. They said trauma leaves teeth marks long after the wounds close.